We begin Shacharis, at least we change Chazanim on Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur at the word in the Machzor, HaMelech, the king. If you open your Yom Kippur Machzor to page 555, you'll see it there in great big letters. Kiddush Levana Oisius, they're called. This is the way they're printed in most Machzorim that I've ever seen. Great big letters there, the top of the page, HaMelech. HaMelech. Rabbi Sachs explains this dramatic moment in davening. Now, we haven't changed a single word of the prayers. We've just highlighted and emphasized one word. HaMelech, the king. The Shacharis Chazan takes over, starts at the back of the shul, moves forward, and now we are fully in days of awe mode. We proclaim and we know who is king. In some Machzorim, it has a little story for us to put us in a frame of mind right before this powerful shift. The story is this. Rabbi Aaron of Karlin, once on Yom Tov, when he started to say the word HaMelech, he fainted, passed out right there in shul. After he came to, they asked him what happened. He said he was meditating on the words from the Talmud, Tractate Gittin, where it says, I malka ana ad hashta amai lo asis legabai. If indeed I am the king, why haven't you come to me until now? And Rabbi Aaron thought to himself, what answer do I have to give? I don't have a good answer. That is a question for us to meditate on too. If God is the king, as we are saying on Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, and every prayer in between, HaMelech HaKadosh, why haven't we come until now? It's a good question. It's a good story. Let me tell you the context of that story to give us even more background for the Yizkor prayers we're going to say on Yom Kippur. These words, if I am the king, why did you not come to me until now, are the words spoken by Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai. He was among the first generation of Tanaim, teachers of the oral Torah in the late Second Temple times. And during the siege of Jerusalem, Yerushalayim, the eternal capital of Israel, the people were starving. And Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai hatched a plan to leave the city and to plead for the lives of the people with Vespasian, the Roman general who was in command of the siege. The thing was, the local zealots, the Jews, had imposed a rule that no Jew was allowed to leave Yerushalayim, with one exception, to be buried. So his chevra staged a trick whereby Rabbi Yochanan faked sickness and decline and faked his death. They placed him in a casket, and Rabbi Eliezer, Rabbi Yeshua carried him to the gates of the city. There were Jewish sentries there enforcing this ban of exit, make sure nobody got out. They were suspicious, and they wanted to put their swords through the casket just to make sure. One of the group said, do you want the Romans to be able to say that the Jews stabbed their own rabbi? The pallbearers took him out of the city and left the casket in the middle of a field alone. That night, Rabbi Yochanan climbed out of the box and made his way. He went to Vespasian in the Roman camp. As soon as he entered the command post, he greeted General Vespasian with the words, Shlama Alach Malka, Shlama Alach Malka, Aramaic, peace be unto you, O king. The Gemara says that Vespasian answered, you are liable for death on two accounts. Mechayev Treitakala. Not sure if the Roman general spoke Aramaic or not, but that's what the Gemara says. First of all, he said, I'm not a king, and you called me king. You're mocking me. You're making fun of me. That's number one. Number two, he said, this is where we get our phrase, Imalkana, if indeed I am the king. Ad ha'edna amai lo asas lagabai. Why haven't you come to me until now? Rabbi Yochanan had answers for both charges, but while they were talking in the course of their conversation, a messenger from Rome suddenly arrived, rather dramatically on the scene, and told Vespasian, Cum, demisle Caesar. I guess he was also speaking Aramaic. This is probably a translation from the Roman, Latin, Italian, whatever it was. Misle Caesar, he said, arise, the messenger said to the general. Caesar has died, and Rome has appointed you as the new emperor. Wow. Vespasian prepared himself to go back to Rome and assume his new position, and as he did, he recognized Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai's wisdom, and he said, I'm leaving you now, so ask me for something that I can give you as a gift. Rabbi Yochanan said those famous, often quoted words, Tein li Yavne v'chachameh. Give me Yavne, the city of Yavne, and the sages who live in it. In other words, spare this city of Torah study. Yavne was a city on the coast of Israel, full of yeshivas and teachers and students, where Torah study was blossoming, flourishing. It was not a political tinderbox like Yerushalayim, it was an intellectual capital. Rabbi Yochanan asked for that to be left alone, rather than Jerusalem being spared from being sacked by the Roman legions, as it subsequently was. He said, in effect, let scholarship rise, let that endure, and what will happen to politics will happen. A whole conversation follows in the Gemara of Monday morning rabbis who ask, why didn't he ask to have Yerushalayim spared? Just this one time. Others say, Rabbi Yochanan was no slouch. He figured that if he would have asked for such a great favor, it would not have been granted, and then we would have been left with nothing. He made a cheshbon. He calculated that if he asked for something a little bit more modest that he could work with, maybe he stood a better chance of actually getting it from the brand new emperor. So, although Vespasian's replacement was Titus, and things did not go well for Yerushalayim after that, the historical fact is that Yavne was indeed spared, and it came eventually to be the saving remnant of the Jewish people. From Yavne, on the seacoast, Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai and his colleagues reconvened the Sanhedrin, the Jewish Supreme Court, and the beginning of Rabbinic Judaism, which sustains us today, 2,000 years later, with texts, traditions, memories, celebrations, observances, even without a temple, even for those many years that we did not have sovereignty over Jerusalem. Now, that's one reading of history. Others suggest that maybe Rabbi Yochanan's calculus was different. Yavne was the Torah center of its day, yeshivas, learning, scholarship. Jerusalem was a political hotbed. There were all kinds of warring factions within the Jewish community. The story of Kamsa bar Kamsa comes from this same sugya, this same passage in the Talmud. Maybe Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai was saying, let's choose Torah over politics and zealotry. Maybe he made that calculation. Who can really know what's in the heart of another person? Any way you look at it, this was in the truest sense a watershed moment, the beginning of the transformation of Judaism from an exclusively temple-centered culture to a completely, ultimately, absolutely portable culture that would go anywhere, could be taken anywhere on the planet, nourish us, sustain us, embrace us, bring us through Roman and Ottoman domination of Israel, and through our travels as a people, through Italy and North Africa and Babylon and Persia and Spain and Amsterdam, Galicia, Russia, Lithuania, South Africa, Australia, Canada, America, and everywhere else, back to Israel. Although, to be fair to history, we should note that there were at least 4 cities in Israel where there has been a Jewish community uninterrupted since the times of the Tanakh, since biblical times. In any case, we owe a great debt, a great deal we owe to Rabbi Yochanan. But it's worth noting that he himself was not so confident. Because in a completely separate Gemara, one that we have studied in our Monday afternoon class, it tells there about Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai at the very end of his life. He was lying on his deathbed. He was crying. He was weeping. Gemara in Brachas tells us. His disciples came to visit him, and seeing him cry, they called out to him with all manner of praise for his leadership and his accomplishments. Light of Israel, pillar of the right hand, mighty hammer, they called him. They said, why are you crying? The teacher answered them, if I were being taken before a king of flesh and blood today, who's here today and gone tomorrow, and whose anger, if he's angry at me, does not last forever, who, if he imprisons me, doesn't put me to everlasting death, even so I would weep. Now that I am being taken before the King of all kings, whose life endures forever, whose anger is an everlasting anger, who, if he imprisons me forever, and whom I cannot possibly appease. And when there are 2 ways before me, one leading to Gan Eden, one leading to Gehenna, and I do not know by which one they will lead me, shall I not weep? Shall I not cry? He said to his students, assembled there around his deathbed. His students realized that his end was near, and they said, bless us, O our teacher. His bracha to them, he said, may it be the will that the fear of heaven upon you be like the fear of a human being. The disciples sort of looked at each other and said, is that enough? Is that it? And the teacher answered, if only you had that. For know, when a person sins, he only worries that no other person will see him. A number of commentaries in our days, Rabbi Aaron Lichtenstein among them, connect the two stories about Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai. What was it that was causing such anguish? What was causing Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai such misery, this great transformational leader among the Jewish people, whose influence is so far-reaching that we still feel its impact, and we still tell his story now, 20 centuries later? What doubts were hounding at Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai all his life, so much that the founder of the Judaism that we know and we live with every day was unsure if his life would lead to paradise or to damnation? It was doubt and uncertainty that he had made the right call. He gave up Yerushalayim. Maybe a different person in that spot would have said, give us Jerusalem just this once. It's our city. It's our place. It's our home. Have Rachmanis, O Vespasian, however you say that in Latin. Maybe Rabbi Yochanan thought he should have gone out on a limb. In retrospect, in hindsight, he should have put all the chips on one number, bet the whole farm on the holy city, remnants of the temple, bricks and wood. Maybe. He didn't do that. He put all his eggs in a different basket. The mind, the heart, the soul of the Jewish people. Not the sacred land, the holy city, but the city of the mind, the temple of the heart. For us it seems obvious, perhaps. Of course, take values over real estate. Choose what you can take with you or carry in your pocket, in your head, over what one day you may have to abandon. We're going to need it. To us, it seems very obvious. We have 2,000 years of experience in exile to prove to us that that's exactly what you do. Appreciate and understand that wealth and land is here today, gone tomorrow. But the values and outlook and life, the Torah we received from our ancestors, is forever. No one's ever been able to take that away from us, even when they robbed us of everything: our homes, our possessions, our professions, our names, our hair. We stayed Jews, we davened, we learned from memory because it was inside us and no enemy could ever touch that. But it was not so obvious for Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai. He lived at the twilight of the Second Temple, an institution that had been the absolute center of Jewish life for almost 1,000 years. How could anyone imagine that it would ever be any different? I've heard Professor Marty Linsky from Harvard School of Government say on more than one occasion that leadership means, a definition of leadership is disappointing your people at a rate that they can absorb. Disappointing your people at a rate they can absorb. Rabbi Yochanan's challenge was to speak to an era of all or nothing zealots, fighting in the streets, thirsty, ready for martyrdom. Remember, Masada also comes from the same era. He said, come on, guys. It's not worth fighting and dying over. We'll think of something else. That risk, that gamble, that shot in the dark, as it was then, quite possibly weighed on Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai's conscience the rest of his life, and even haunted him to the point of tears as he lay dying. Thankfully, we're not laying dying. We're not crying with such lifelong remorse. Then again, which of us has been in the position to make such an epoch-making call on behalf of the entire Jewish people? Who among us has had the weight of the fulcrum of history balanced on our shoulders? I'll share with you what I think each one of us has. And we do find ourselves in exactly that position all the time. Because the choices we make, the things that we do and the things that we decline to do, the things that we prioritize and the things that we procrastinate. All these choices, all these things have far-reaching implications, much further even than we can begin to imagine. If you asked Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, 1900 and something, almost 2,000 years ago, Rabbi, what's your vision for the Jewish people 2,000 years from now in Canada? Would he have even understood the question? Whether or not he understood the geography, he was thinking far into the future. What's going to keep us going? Is it politics and power? Or is it prayer, study, learning, the life of the mind, making acts of kindness into a religious obligation, into a religious celebration, making memory into a sacrament, as the scholars would say? Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai took the foundations of Judaism, which used to rest on a very solid rock. It doesn't get any more solid than Mount Moriah, the Temple Mount, a rock, not just any rock, the rock where Abraham was ready to sacrifice Isaac. That was the place where the great temple of Yerushalayim was built and destroyed and rebuilt, bigger and better, new and improved, the center of Jewish life, the place where the Kohen Gadol, the high priest, resplendent in his vestments, performed the awesome service of Yom Kippur, which we're going to relive on Yom Kippur when we hear Musaf. The locus of forgiveness of sin, of atonement, kapara, the place where the king, the Jewish king, read the Torah to the people on the Hakel year. Rabbi Yochanan let it go. He let it go, and he placed everything on our shoulders. He put it on our minds, on our hearts, on our Shabbos tables at home, on our bookshelves at home, in our kitchens, and on our doorposts, and in our day school classrooms and our yeshivas. That's where Judaism rests now. That's the foundation of the Jewish people. It's not a rock in Jerusalem that's been there since the beginning of time, but it's on you, and it's on me, and it's on all of us, from the heads of the tribes and the elders and the judges to the wood choppers and the drawers of water, as we read 2 weeks ago on Shabbos. That's the foundation of Judaism and the future on which the Jewish people rests. On the shul presidents, on the people who helped set up the Kiddush, on those who pledged to the golf tournament and to the Yom Kippur appeal. See what I did there? To those who come to shul to say Yizkor, to those, because of the health situation, they daven at home, they say Yizkor at home, but they daven with all their hearts and their souls. And Rabbi Yochanan wasn't sure if he'd made the right call, if he made the right decision. Maybe better a national monument, a national temple, so that when anyone asks, hey, what is Judaism all about? Tell me what Judaism is. We would have said, well, you have to go to Jerusalem. You have to see the temple. That's what it's all about. If you go on the high holy days, you'll see this high priest wearing special clothing, does a whole thing with a goat, there's a bull, there's a ram, 7 yearling lambs, the whole thing, incense. I hear it's quite a sight to see. We don't say that. We say that Judaism is us. You want to judge it? You have to judge it by me. If you want to see it, walk into any shul, any Shabbos. That's where Judaism is. You come to shul on Shabbos morning and people daven. And really what's davening? Standing there quietly with your feet together, your lips moving quietly like Chana in the Haftorah we read on Rosh Hashanah. That's Jewish prayer. And then there's a Torah scroll, and we take it out. Usually we kiss it, not during COVID, but usually we kiss it because we love it. We take it out and we read a portion. Each week a different portion. Some weeks it's a great story, powerful story about Joseph and his brothers. Some weeks it's a guy like Balak or Amalek. Some weeks it's Mount Sinai. Some weeks it's a bunch of Jews complaining in the desert. We talk about that topic for a week, then we move on to something else. We come back to it a year later. We study about laws so that we can do them. When to say the Shema in the morning, when to say Shema in the nighttime. What do you mean morning? What defines that? What do you mean evening? What's the definition of evening? And then once a year we get together with our families and we eat unleavened bread that's hard to digest like slaves. And we eat horseradish that makes us cry like slaves. And we tell how hard it was to be slaves, but we remember that now we're free. You want to know what Judaism is about? Come over to our house for the Seder. Come over to our house for Friday night dinner. That's what Judaism is really about. Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai traded Jerusalem, in effect. Traded our eternal capital, the temple, Beis Hashem, the house where God's presence dwells, for that. For a Talmud class, for a Seder plate, for a dreidel, and for a menorah. And he wasn't sure if he bet on the right number. Because a temple made of stones, of huge, massive stones, is there. That is, of course, until it's not there anymore. And he knew that. But Jewish life is there. All we have to do is make it so. And if you did it last year, good, but it's not enough. You have to do it this year also. If you did it last Shabbos, you made Kiddush, you davened, maybe you learned a little Pirkei Avos, good, but you have to do it this Shabbos too. If you opened a book and you learned some Torah, you looked at the Parsha, wonderful, but you have to do it again today, or else it's yesterday's news, it's last week's Parsha. So maybe Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai knew exactly what he was crying about and what he was worried about. And we cry and we worry a little bit too. Maybe that's what Yizkor's about too. We take a moment at one of these high points in the Jewish calendar, Yom Kippur, 2 weeks from now, Shmini Atzeres, Pesach and Shavuos, 4 times in the year. High points in our year, thinking about great moments in our past, talking about Moshe and other great leaders of our history, and we pause just for a minute to reflect on our own personal leaders, our own inspirations, our parents, our grandparents, the ones who handed it all over to us. Now, we all have different stories about what exactly was handed to us and who exactly handed it to us and what was said when they handed it over, and maybe we had to adjust things just a little bit. We altered the fit just a little bit so it would fit on us better, just as they did, just as their parents did. I can't help thinking, though, that if Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai would walk into our shul today, which of course would not happen because we didn't send him a ticket, so he would not get past the security guard, but if he had a ticket, and if he would agree to wear a mask, and the great Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai would agree to use hand sanitizer and remain 6 feet away from everybody else in shul, if he would come in and sit down and listen to what we're davening, and to what we're saying in our prayers, and how we're still talking about the temple, even here in Canada, and we're still talking about the service of the Kohen Gadol in Yerushalayim. We're talking about it in Toronto, and how we blew the shofar last week. And then we would come over for lunch, and we would pass him the tzimis, and we'd pass him the kugel and the honey cake. He would say, what do I look like, a Litvak? Okay, we'd have to teach him a few words in Yiddish, but I think it wouldn't take him long to catch on. I think Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai would feel good about his decision. Maybe the same can be said of our grandparents and parents. We've had discussions in past years that some of our ancestors would be quite surprised, to say the least, to see us in a shul like this, davening like this, living like this. That was not necessarily what they intended to pass on. But they forgot, or they pretended to forget, that Yiddishkeit, Judaism, is just like the Afikomen. No matter how well you hide it, the kids will eventually find it. We take a few minutes on Yom Kippur to say Yizkor and to mention the names of our parents. We're not going to mention the names of our great-great-grandparents. Some of us probably don't even know their names, all the way back to Lithuania or Galicia or Spain or Amsterdam or even Yavne or even Yerushalayim. We're not going to mention Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, even though I just did for about 15 or 20 minutes. We're not going to mention Rabbi Akiva or Reish Lakish or Rabbi Meir or Bruria or all the fathers and mothers who carried the temple and Yom Kippur and Pesach and the Mishnah and Kriya Shema and all the mitzvahs on their shoulders and passed it along so that we could carry it on our shoulders. And we're not going to mention our own names, even though it's obvious. We're wearing white, a kittel. It's the clothes a person's buried in. We're reminding ourselves, not so subtly, that one day we won't be here. And the next generations will be carrying it all on their shoulders, and they'll have us to thank. We hope. We're not completely sure, because you can never be completely sure. But when we think, am I doing my best? Am I making the most of every day? Am I making the most of every year? We might cry just a little bit, like Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai. We might cry just a little bit and think, you know what? I could do better, and I will do better. Today on Yom Kippur, our slate is wiped clean. It's a new chance to build, a new chance to learn, a new chance to forge my part as the next link in a chain of tradition that stretches all the way back and all the way forward to the end of time. When in years to come they think of me, what will they remember me for? That's a question that faces us on Yom Kippur. as we turn to say Yizkor. We turn to Yizkor to acknowledge and to remember and act in the memory of those who preceded us, and thanks to whom we're alive today. Some of those relationships are suffused with warm, loving memories. Others have a mix of emotions, and even many unresolved and unanswered questions. We take a moment to say Yizkor, and we pledge to tzedakah, and then on Tuesday, or as soon as possible thereafter, we pay up the pledge, because doing so is an act of kapara. Remember that the official name of the day is Yom Kippurim. That's what it says on the cover of your Koren Machzor. Take a look. Why Kippurim in plural? What's wrong with Yom Kippur? Yom Kippurim, it's two kaparas. It's the atonement for the living, and it's also the atonement for the dead. The souls gain atonement, a measure of redemption, by us saying Yizkor and our giving tzedakah on their behalf. So we can, in fact, influence history. Even better, we can redeem it. And that's what we're doing with Yizkor on Yom Kippur. A note for those davening at home: your Yizkor will not be the same as Yizkor in Shul. So while, as we learned at Shavuos time earlier this year, there is a plus side to saying Yizkor in Shul, there's nothing to be lost by saying Yizkor at home. In fact, let's take it a step further. We're all going to turn to page 756 in the Machzor, and we're going to read out loud together those passages there that are a preface to our own Yizkor prayers in the pages that follow. But for those davening at home, nobody's going to interrupt you or tell you when it's time to move on to Kel Malei Rachamim or to Avarachimim on page 760. Nobody's going to call out pages. Nobody's going to interrupt your focus at all. You take as long as you need to think through Yizkor, to remember what needs to be remembered, to meditate on what needs to be meditated upon, and to atone and redeem what it is within our power to resolve, and be able to move on with a clean slate into the new year. The rest of us in Shul will do our best, and we'll all continue to be thinking of one another as we move forward into the new year, and may all of us be sealed finally for good, for life and health and happiness in the book of life. Gemar Chatima Tova.